Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagoshnik. Thank you so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. He is a writer for Cold Omaha, along with other blogs around the internet. Also works with 1500 ESPN. He is a generally useful human, and he is Arif Hassan. Arif, how you doing this Sunday night?
I am doing fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm really happy about the way that the Cowboys game ended tonight. The fact that Jordan Matthews of the Eagles didn't get half a point more means that I managed to beat a guy who started two guys on a bye. And I'm super excited about that
because you avoided the most embarrassing possible situation.
Well, two of my starters got 0 points. So I'm it was a wash, but I at least wanted to have the effort shown. I may go 3-0 this week in fantasy simply because of how Dak Prescott handled the ending and how two defenders from the Eagles, who supposedly have a defense. Did you hear that? How two defenders from the Eagles did not run into each other; they just fell down. In the end zone, right on their bottom, just fell down, and then leaving Jason Witten to go. So this is how the game's gonna end, guys. This is what we're doing. All right, I'll have this untouched. It'll be fine. Yay! Welcome to this week's show. We got plenty to talk about. Dusty is on assignment. I assume working, but Dusty's on assignment, so you got me for this particular preview, and we got lots of stuff to talk about. We're going to look at the preview for the Bears game, some news on Jerick McKinnon, and take a look at the mailbag. But before we do any of that, I would just like to thank you guys for listening. Thank you so much for sharing the show, for helping this be easily our best year and best month ever, and. Thanks again. We really do appreciate it. We are not ad-based. We don't have ads in the middle of the show. We are purely a subscription-based thing, or just supported by you guys. So, if you hear value in the show, you can donate to the show in two different ways. You can go to paypal.me/Norse Code, or you can go to patreon.com/Norse Code, and you can help us out there. Also, if you happen to knock on our doors and happen to be peddling some wares, selling things, or trying to convert people to other religions, mention that you listen to the show, we feel like you should provide us with Tree Fitty right there. I feel like if you're in that sort of scenario, you can reach down in your pocket and hand us $3.50, and we will gladly take your money and put it toward Norse Code. That's what we agreed to do, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I've been in situations where I've gone to football coaches' offices and I've heard the show, and heard the show playing and been like, "Oh, hey, yeah, that's our show." That's kind of cool. But I've never had somebody come to the door.
Yeah, no, it was pretty interesting. Jehovah's Witnesses, they come every Sunday, which I understand, but is the worst possible time for me because Sundays are when football's played.
Sunday is your church. You're in the middle of your church. You're fine.
They're like, hey, have you heard of Jehovah's Witnesses? And I was like, yes, you come here every week. But they never, remember or recognize me or indicate that they do. So,
So, once again, if you hear value in the show, just please go ahead and head over to patreon.com/Norse Code or go to paypal.me/Norse Code. Thanks again for listening, and let's get into the show. First things first, before we get into the preview, what's going on with Jerick McKinnon and Cordarrelle Patterson? Is there anything late breaking that's going to cause them to miss the game?
It seems like McKinnon is not going to play. I think, his ankle again? Whatever it is, he was only out of the walking boot on Friday, and then he wasn't, cleared to play after that. As for Patterson, I think he's going to play. He's been playing more and more snaps with the Vikings, and he's out snapping Charles Johnson now. So that's hey, that's pretty great. I don't think that there's anything that will prevent Cordero Patterson from playing, as far as I know. It was just I think it was just a concussion, and he was just cleared, so he's expected to play. Sendejo is also out. Um, that's going to be interesting because he's actually been playing all right. I want to say he's been playing well. A couple of people have been like, he's been playing well, you should call him out. He's been playing all right. Certainly better than J. Ron Kirsch played last week. So that's going to be interesting, too. I don't know if Anthony Harris is going to get some rotation at safety. We're going to see. But it looks like Patterson's going to play. He cleared the concussion protocol.
Well, that's good news. Too bad about McKinnon, but with that sort of ankle injury, we don't want to rush him back, sort of thing. So if McKinnon's not going to end up playing, then who's going to end up moving into the number 2 spot for running back?
Yeah, I think Matt Asiata is going to just be like the starter. I think he's going to get bell cow type carries, something like 18 to 20 carries. We're going to see a couple of runs from Patterson. We're going to see a couple of runs from maybe Ronnie Hillman. That's going to be interesting to see how that plays out because he's only been with the offense for a couple of weeks, and his one run wasn't great, but it wasn't entirely on him either. The 6-yard loss. His pass protection was pretty poor, though. He only had one snap in pass protection, and he allowed a sack. So I don't know how much they're going to trust him, but I expect he'll get some play, just not that much. And I think they're just going to rely on Asiata to get 3 yards of play every play.
Push the pile, 3 yards, fall down, or conversely, make it to the red zone, score 3 touchdowns, be done.
Right, Asiata.
Yep, as the Asiata turns. So let's talk Bears. We had a horrific showing against the Eagles last week as far as our offensive line goes, and what should we expect the offensive line to be up against as far as the Bears defense?
I was on previous shows I'd mentioned that the pass rush is the only thing the Bears have going well for them, and then I went ahead and I was trying to take a look at sort of the pressure rate the Bears have produced, especially versus like other team, especially once you account for team strength. And the Bears are actually relatively low. They've only produced pressure on about 25% of pass rushing snaps, which ranks 29th out of the 32 teams. So that's pretty bad. So they've actually got a bad unit everywhere, but a reason I'm still worried about it is because Pernell McPhee is coming back from injury, and he was a very good primary pressure producer for the Bears last season. He was underrated, across the league in terms of the ability to create pressures. He's going to be back, and he's going to, threaten the Vikings. That and Leonard Floyd has played a little bit better the last 2 games, so maybe, he's sort of figured things out. Maybe he hasn't, players go on runs. And from that perspective, they'll have a better pass rush, and that's something to worry about. Generally speaking, this might be the kind of game where you take a look at the offensive line and you're like, hey, this could be a confidence builder. Who knows? Still, Pernell McPhee is enough of a problem that I would find ways to deal with him. Either double team him just because the rest of the Bears defense isn't getting much pressure, and of course Lamar Houston's on IR, Ego Ferguson's on IR. Some of that's just not the fault of the personnel staff. But yeah, if you double team Lamar Houston and just do your job with everybody else, you might be in a good spot. Or not Lamar Houston, Pernell McPhee, you might be in a good job everywhere else. That said, if that's not what you want to do, the Vikings need to have an answer. They should probably switch to a short passing game or allow screens to get things going. The Bears are not a very good tackling team, and if you get Cordell Patterson and Jarius Wright going on screens, I feel like you can get a lot done.
So what are we going to be looking at as far as Asiata then? How do you feel like Asiata is going to do against that Bears defense?
I think that Asiata is probably going to do pretty well. I don't really think much of the Bears' running defense. In Eric Thompson's preview at the Daily Norseman, he mentioned that the advanced stats actually like the Bears a lot more than a lot of people do. The Bears rank really low in power ratings, so 29, 30, 31. From an advanced stats perspective, the Bears are actually doing better than people tend to give them credit for. They're 19th in defensive DVOA, for example. But still, their running defense isn't that great. They're 20th in running defense by DVOA. And the Vikings are not an amazing running team by any reasonable stretch of the imagination. But they're 23rd. A lot of people would have them ranked 30. Oh no, they're 32. I read that wrong. But I think that without Eagle Ferguson, without Lamar Houston, and just with the amount of push that we're seeing the Bears allow up the middle in general, I think that you could get a running game going. I'm not like uber confident, but I do like how the interior offensive line has been playing the last couple of weeks. So I think that there's like money to be made essentially in the running game. I think that there's like movement they can make, especially because one of their defensive ends, Mitch Unrein, has been playing extremely poorly. You do have to watch out a little bit for Will Sutton, who's been playing a little bit better in the past couple of weeks, and Akeem Hicks is kind of underrated in their base package. But for the most part, it's not a running defense I'm extraordinarily worried about. One player you should watch out for, though, is Jarrell Freeman. Is one of the offseason acquisitions that everyone was praising. He's arguably a little bit better this year. And for the most part, I think that he's done a pretty good job both in coverage and in run defense. They also grabbed Danny Trevathan, who is more, in my opinion, of a pass defender, who's been doing pretty well there. But it's not as if he's like bad against the run. So the linebackers are what I'd worry about more. And the biggest problem is that the Vikings are doing a pretty poor job of getting to the second level and walling off defenders. Like Joe Berger and Brandon Fusco in particular are not that great, or have not been that great this year at blocking on the run and blocking on the move and blocking into the second level, even though both of them have shown some pretty good play over the last two weeks in the run game. They've been getting a lot of push up front, but they haven't been able to get to the second level, which, hey, if you've got Asiata in there anyway, it's not as if you're going to make that many second level yards. So that might not be as big of a problem with the way the Vikings might want to approach their run game this week, but it's something to watch out for.
How about Bradford? What do you think Bradford's going to end up dealing with as far as harassment by the linebackers and by the safeties of Chicago?
Yeah, well, if you take a look at the passing coverage, Chicago's been doing a pretty good job with the linebackers passing coverage. I just mentioned that Danny Trevathan has been pretty good for them. In the nickel package, they also have Crevon LeBlanc, who is not a name that many people are familiar with, but has actually done pretty well in the slot. They've gotten a better season out of Tracy Porter this year than they were able to get last year, and I think they've been forced to play Bryce Callahan on the outside as well. And they've all been okay. Like, it's actually kind of surprising if you take a look at sort of how they've been playing this year. They've all been relatively okay in coverage, but none of them are that threatening. And I think that this is more of a game where it's not as much about the quarterback's ability to read the coverage and figure out sort of based off of the scheme who's schematically going to be open. I think this is more of a game where your receivers are just going to be relied upon to win the individual matchups. Maybe try to force them into man coverage a little bit more often by running 3-by-1 sets. Or spreading the ball out a little bit more and letting your receivers sort of win the individual battles. Because I think if you match them up individually, I think that, for example, this is a game where Stephon Diggs can return back to form. He's kind of fallen off the map in terms of total receiving yardage in the last couple of weeks. I think that if you can get Stephon Diggs up against Tracy Porter, for example, I think that you've got some pretty good matchups in terms of what Diggs' quickness can do. I think that if you've got Cordell Patterson against Bryce Callahan, I think that you've got a pretty decent way to break tackles and continue moving forward. I think that Adam Thielen is going to be kind of interesting. If they play him in the slot, or if they play him outside, I kind of like him on the outside just because I kind of wanted to play physical against Bryce Callahan. But it's not as if you can't play physical against Crevon LeBlanc too. So I think that from the perspective of the cornerbacks, those matchups are going to dictate what happens. This is not a game where I'm as high on Kyle Rudolph based off of the matchup. I know that defensively the Bears have been kind of even across the board against tight ends, for example. The Bears are, I would say an average or a below average team in terms of preventing tight ends from getting yardage and making plays, especially on third down and stuff like that. I just like the matchups at receiver a little bit more than I do at tight end. I still think Kyle Rudolph's probably going to get 20, 30 yards at least, maybe 40, 50 yards, and that's probably going to be pretty good for him. But, for the most part, I would stick to sort of the receiver the wide receiver receiving game, just because I think those matchups individually in terms of skill sets are a little bit better. I would also recommend for Bradford, a couple more deep shots if they're in cover 2. Adrian Amos is actually having a pretty good season. It's kind of being, covered up by how poorly the Bears are playing overall. But what they've got going on at the other safety position, I think it's Harold Jones-Cordy. He's mostly a strong safety. You'll see him in the box a lot. But, if they roll into cover 2 or cover 4, I would attack him a lot, either with, Kyle Rudolph as a tight end or Cordell Patterson or Charles Johnson or whoever, because I think that's a matchup that can be exploited. So I think that, if you're trying to force them into man coverage, I think that you try to win those individual matchups intermediate. But if they do end up in zone coverage for whatever reason, I think your option route should be to attack that strong safety, because I think that you're going to win a lot of your snaps that way.
Before the show, you and I had discussed that the IR list for the Bears is almost as bad as the Vikings. What are the notable names that are destroyed by IR for this team?
Defensively, I already mentioned Lamar Houston's out, Nico Ferguson is out. Kyle Fuller, who, he played well in his first couple of games for Chicago and then dipped off, his rookie year. I think they were kind of waiting for him to break out this season. But at cornerback defensively, Kyle Fuller's out, and so is Brandon Boykin. Brandon Boykin has a pectoral injury. Kyle Fuller has a knee injury. There is a chance, that Kyle Fuller will come back later in the season. So, if the Vikings end up, when the Vikings end up playing the Bears later, he might be back. But the fact that they've got, 2 cornerbacks that they expected to start in the nickel package out is pretty significant. I know that DeAndre Hall is out too for an ankle injury, but that was true like last week as well. He's going to come back, relatively soon, 3-4 weeks from now. But for the most part, defensively they're a little bit better off than they are offensively. Again, they're missing pass rush in Houston and Ferguson. They're missing some coverage players in Fuller and Boykin. But it's kind of offensively that they've got more problems. They've got obviously everyone knows about Kevin White being out. He's on injured reserve. Eddie Royal is doubtful for the game. That's pretty big deal. Marquez Wilson was supposed to step up with Kevin White out, and for a second he did. But then he got a foot injury, so he's out. Of course, they've got 2 quarterbacks on IR, so they're forced to play Jay Cutler, who they willfully benched. They didn't want to play Jay Cutler, and now they do. Now they have to. I feel like there's some weird voodoo magic.
It's the Fitzpatrick situation all over again.
Right, exactly.
Or Fitzpatrick's like, so do you think they have the confidence, or do you think they have all the confidence in the world? And he was like, well, they kind of have to now.
That was amazing, incidentally.
Yes.
Yeah, and it was the exact same situation, except I feel like Cutler is more likely to just rub people the wrong way. I feel like it's pretty obvious at this point. So that's relatively significant. They've also got Hronis Grasu on IR. I didn't actually like his play all that much last year. I know a couple of people were pointing to how he had improved a little bit in some areas, but for the most part, at center they may have improved, but still they're not in a situation where I think they're actually going to play him at guard, in which case they're actually in a bad spot because they have to play Eric Kush at guard. But their offensive line is bad except for their center with Cody Whitehair. So I don't know how much Hronis Grasu being out really impacts them, but it's an offensive line injury on a fairly bad offensive line. So that impacts them.
Yeah, the Vikings wouldn't know anything about that.
Right? Also, it seems like I think Kyle Long is going to be out for this game as well. I guess. He hasn't been playing as well as he had been in previous years, so that's a pretty big deal, and that's probably why they have to, play people like Eric Kush and Ted Larson. But yeah, it's a bad situation for them in terms of their offensive line. Wouldn't know anything about that.
Nothing at all. Nope. Absolutely nothing at all. So we've talked about the defense that we're going to be facing this Monday. Are there any opportunities for players like Adam Thielen or Cordero Patterson to really just break out and move and exploit this defense?
Yeah, the defense schematically should create some holes. I know the Vic Fangio defense in San Francisco used a bunch of different types of zone concepts that were relatively popular several years ago, but have become, I don't want to say outdated, but have not really kept up with the times, maybe. The way that they run the defense at the back end, it's like it's different than the Tampa 2, but it can look somewhat similar at times because of the way that they do their coverage techniques. I know that they've done something called a cover 6, which is a combined cover 2, cover 4 defense. I know that that's something they did in San Francisco a lot. I know that generally speaking, it's like somewhat difficult to diagnose when you're a quarterback at the back end, but it's become more and more predictable over time because the way they do their defensive alignments up front kind of dictates what they do in their coverage behind them. So you're going to see two corners, or you're going to see a corner and a safety splitting cover 4 responsibilities up top. A lot of times, while you'll see the other safety or another cornerback take up half the field on the other side, and that's the player that you want to stress with a lot of these concepts. And the Vikings have not really attacked coverages in the same way from a matchup perspective as a lot of other teams have. They've mostly run their offense and let the quarterback kind of choose. But as they go forward, they've been doing a little bit more and more of that. And if they want to run these corner routes against the single safety side of the field, against the cover 2 side of the field, they're probably in a really good spot because they haven't really been clicking and closing against those wide receivers in zone coverage. So Thielen, for example, is actually pretty good at running the corner route, not because necessarily he's the most precise route runner in the world, but because he knows sort of where to find the hole in the zone and exploit it. And even when they do close, even if he's running the route a little bit too shallow or a little bit too sharp, they'll still win the catch because his ability to win in contested catches. So the corner route is something I'd really enjoy. It is kind of disappointing not to have Teddy in there for that because Bridgewater is probably one of the better quarterbacks in the league at the corner route, and Bradford is like relatively average at it. Obviously, with Bradford, you get like a better deep ball and stuff like that. But for that specific route, Bridgewater's been better, and I don't think that that's something that they'll experiment with. But I think they're gonna continue with some similar concepts. Like quick outs, I think they're going to try to attack the seam. The seam is not as large against Chicago's defense as it is for a lot of other defenses, which is another reason I'm kind of down on Kyle Rudolph as a tight end. But they're going to try to attack the seam because they have attacked the seam before. I really think that your best opportunities will come from the individual matchups when you force them into man coverage by spreading the ball out. I don't know how often that's going to happen, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's a screen-heavy game in order to neutralize Pernell McPhee's return.
That could be interesting too. Let's flip to the other side of the ball real quick, and let's talk about Jay Cutler, also known as the gift who keeps on giving. Because he is going to end up playing here, how is that offensive line going to end up holding up, and are we going to be able to get to Mr. Sack, Mr. Interception, Mr. Jay Cutler?
Yeah, man. Jay Cutler's a ride, right?
You buy the ticket and you're stuck. You cannot get off.
Yeah, the lap bar closes down, it locks into place, and you get like this ominous sense of like, oh, I'm not at an amusement park. I'm at an amusement park in a horror movie. This is great.
Yeah.
It echoes throughout the chamber.
Yes, Dusty's favorite chamber, in fact. You're just kind of stuck. God, every year somebody has the suggestion, are they just going to be done with Smokin' Jay? And the team just doesn't want to give him up. So yeah, it really looked like this was going to end up being the season for getting rid of him, and Brian Hoyer was doing a fairly decent job, and then Clay Matthews went and broke his arm.
Yeah, it's Jay Cutler just finds a way, man. He just finds a way.
He really is the gift that keeps on giving. So how is our defense going to end up doing against that porous offensive line?
I mean, pretty well. I think you kind of gave it away. One thing to note before I get into that individual breakdown. So I called Jay Cutler a ride really quickly. I remember I made a chart of his PFF scores a while back, and so I looked at his PFF scores right now, and it really does actually look like a literal roller coaster. I'm going to take a screenshot and put it in the show notes because that's amazing. Like that, it's an actual roller coaster.
70, 78, 89, 120, 5.
It's good stuff.
If it were a ride, somebody would probably end up with like a C5 vertebrae injury, and somebody suing, and Gloria Allred gets involved.
Right? And then someone else is like, that was the best ride of my life.
Like, you guys don't understand, man. It's not really a roller coaster unless there's a real chance that you're going to end up needing a chiropractor after it.
Right? It's like some Alshon Jeffrey fantasy owner from last year is like, oh, what are you talking about? This is amazing.
or a Michael Vick owner from, what, 2004? Until like last year. No, I'm telling you, it's feast or famine with this guy. It's extreme gambling.
But yeah, I mean, this is a situation that Jay Cutler's fairly familiar with, where the offensive line is complete crap, and he has to deal with it. Like I said, the center's doing pretty well, but I mean, Cody Whitehair is actually having a pretty good season. I just don't see him doing a pretty good job against Linval Joseph, who had like a rare mediocre game this last week against the Eagles. Yeah, I think that the pressure is probably going to define the game. I think that the Vikings cornerbacks can hold up well against what they're doing at receiver. What's his name? Cam Meredith, I think, is playing a lot better than I would have expected. And Alshon Jeffrey is playing a lot worse, than I would have expected. So I guess that kind of evens out. I wouldn't be surprised though if they just have Xavier Rhodes follow Alshon Jeffrey like they have had in the past. He's not winning as many contested catches as normal. He was really good last year. I'm not really sure what the issue is this year, but I mean, he's getting sort of out-physicaled by cornerbacks you wouldn't really expect to out-physical him at the catch point. He's not getting open as easily, which means that he's doing neither of the two things that he's exhibited some nearly elite-level talent in, in previous years. Like, I mean, like last year, a contract year for him, he was, money in the red zone. He just isn't that this year. So it's becoming, a big problem for Chicago because, like, the entire passing game is built around, your Brandon Marshall, Alshon Jeffrey type receivers, where you just throw it up to them. Or I shouldn't say built around. Like with Trustman, it was literally built around that. Now it's just become that. Like that's just how Jay Cutler plays. Like he's just like, yeah, there's a receiver there. I don't see what the problem is. But yeah, I mean they've had a difficult time scoring touchdowns. Alshon Jeffrey, for example, has no receiving touchdowns on the year, which I mean that's just mind-boggling, right? Eddie Royal is their leading receiving touchdown guy besides tight end Zach Miller. But out of the receivers, Eddie Royal is the leading guy. He's out, right? He's on he's just too injured to play. After that, Jordan Howard has more receiving touchdowns than anyone else. So they haven't found a way to get things done in the red zone, and that's actually been their biggest problem. And I think a lot of that has to do with Cutler's general inaccuracy. I think a lot of it has to do with the amount of pressure that Cutler's been under, and I think some of that has to do with the way the receivers have been doing pretty poorly. Like I said, I think Cameron Meredith has been playing a lot better than I think anyone could have reasonably expected, but that's not to say he's been playing, very well. I expect, some combination of Terrence Newman and Trey Waynes to do a pretty good job against him, and I wouldn't be surprised if, throwing at Cameron Meredith results in a passer rating of, below 45 or something like that. So overall, I think that those are probably going to define the game. The biggest issue I'd have is that, Anthony Barr's not playing as well this year as he did last year. He's playing a little bit better in coverage than I thought. But still, he's playing, relatively poorly against the run, but pretty poorly in coverage. Eric Hendricks has been kind of up and down in coverage. Chad Greenway had a really bad game in coverage last week. Kendricks, he's had some really good plays in coverage. He just had a good game in coverage this last week. But for the most part, he's been kind of up and down. And so I'm a little bit worried about the tight end, Zach Miller. But for the most part, the guy throwing the ball is going to be the primary, driver of how well they're going to be able to throw the ball. The Vikings have held, I think, every single quarterback to the worst passer rating of the year so far this year. And Jay Cutler doesn't really have a stellar resume from that perspective. So I think you're going to continue to find that. I think that, Danielle Hunter or Brian Robinson are going to make hay against Bobby Massey, who's the right tackle, who's been awful. I mean, he's almost been TJ Clemmings bad. Like, he's been having a really bad time. When you put him up against a really solid pass rush like the one the Vikings have.
I was going to ask if he was on par, or if he was T.J. Clemmings-esque.
Almost. Like really abysmally bad. And so when you've got Bobby Massey, or when you've got Brian Robinson or Danielle Hunter up against him, I expect to see a bunch of edge pressure from those two guys. Up the middle, when Tom Johnson's in on passing downs, both of their guards are real problems. Eric Kush is one of the worst guards in the league. Ted Larson is a little bit better. And both of them have just, generally speaking, been huge struggles in pass protection. And even when they don't allow like a pressure, they inhibit the ability of quarterbacks to step up into the pocket because they keep on getting pushed up into the pocket. They don't demonstrate the kind of strength that you'd expect either of them to have, and they get walked back into the pocket, even by sub 300-pound defensive tackles like people like Tom Johnson, who don't tend to play with a lot of power. They tend to get walked up into the pocket, and because of that, even if there's not like pressure from like a Pro Football Focus sense, like they log a pressure, it really inhibits the quarterback's ability to step up into the pocket and deal with the problems that Bobby Massey's causing or Charles Leno Jr. at left tackle is causing. By the way, Charles Leno Jr. is like okay. He's better than I thought he would be. He's okay. I expect Everson Griffin, who's been blanked in the past 2 games, to really take it out on this guy and have a good game. Because I think fundamentally Leno is not that great of a tackle, and I think that he's had some weakness against speed off the edge, and he's just kind of gotten away with it over the course of the season, and I think that's probably going to come home to roost here. So I think the Vikings can get a lot of pressure. I think that against the blitz, Cutler's going to look pretty blinkered. I think that when they do the double-A gap blitz stuff, Cody Whitehair's been doing pretty well, but they don't even have Jordan Howard for this game. They've got Kadeem Carey, who's not known for his pass protection. I just don't see how they're going to be able to use those additional blockers and pass protection to really prevent pressure from coming. So I think defensively, that's going to be the name of the game. I do think the Vikings match up well from their cornerbacks against the receivers. I'm not like worried, but I would say sort of the biggest opportunity for the Bears will come through Zach Miller. The Vikings against tight ends in general has been an issue for the past couple of years, more schematically than like quantitatively, because I think that the Vikings are something like 5th or 6th against tight ends this year. But I just think that the best opportunity will come with tight ends, unless, of course, you just have Harrison Smith on Zach Miller the entire game, which is a matchup I'm entirely comfortable with, but it does prevent Harrison Miller from like doing dangerous stuff in the box.
Also, let's just take this moment to transition into a mailbag question real quick from @CallMeKelso, who asks, are we going to have to worry about Alshon Jeffrey running comebacks for 200 yards against Rhodes?
It's actually a legitimate worry that there's going to be like a short passing game that relies on comebacks, and then you're going to have your cornerbacks deal with receivers who can shield the ball well when they attack it and stuff like that. But, I think that, Rhodes' length has demonstrated that even against receivers that are typically good at that sort of thing, like Kelvin Benjamin, for example, that are typically good at that sort of thing, Rhodes has been able to do a really good job just breaking the ball out of their hands. If it was Trey Waynes, I'd be a little bit more worried because he keeps on giving up too much space underneath, and then he's late to close on those comebacks. But Rhodes has actually done a pretty good job in that respect, so I'm not too worried about that. But I do think that that's a route that we're probably going to see a lot of coming out of this particular offense, and with the particular restraints that the Vikings give, because the Bears don't run screens that often, so the way that they deal with short passes are things like slants and those comebacks. So that's a legitimate worry, like that's going to be a route concept that's going to happen a lot. But I don't think with Xavier Rhodes in particular that's going to be a problem, if that makes sense.
I think that makes sense just fine there, but I guess the question is should we expect to have a receiver end up just breaking something nasty against our team? I mean, we have a history over the last couple of games of just giving up monster plays.
Yeah, I think those monster plays have all happened on like running back screens and stuff like that. Like Derrick Henry's run was a short running back pass. I think there was a Ryan Matthews play that was either a running back run or a short pass or something like that. Those have all been in situations where you haven't had a player specifically assigned to cover them, or they were like a linebacker late to the ball, or they happened off the line of scrimmage or something like that, and then sort of poor tackling led to it. For something like a comeback, I'm not as worried about that from Alshon Jeffrey. It is something to watch out for, but because the Bears have to rely on Kadeem Carey, who I know some people are high on, but I'm not that high on him, especially because Jeremy Langford and Jordan Howard had beat him out. I'm just not as worried about that. So it's something to watch out for. Anthony Barr's missed a lot of tackles so far this year. Eric Hendricks has had some issues tackling. And with Jaron Curse, he took, some bad tackling angles in the last game, and that was on a scouting report from college. Those are all, like, legitimate concerns, but I think that given who the players are, it's not as big a deal to me.
All right, so the last thing I want to bring up is special teams, because the last 2 games we have given up a big special teams play. What can we expect in the way of changes or just kind of adapting to Chicago's special teams play?
Yeah, that's pretty fair. I think that the Vikings are pretty well aware of the special teams problem that they've brought upon themselves. But I'm not so wowed by the way that Chicago has been running their special teams unit this year that it's a specific concern about what Chicago does on special teams. I mean, they're not like bad, but they're not necessarily great either. So
more of a what Minnesota has been doing wrong sort of thing, as opposed to what Chicago is doing right.
Right, like so. For example, on the kick return touchdown, Charles Johnson got blocked out. Justin Tratto tripped. Blair Walsh took a bad tackling angle, which I'm not going to blame him too much for it. He's a kicker, but it's just overall, it's just it's just been issues with what the Vikings have done. Marcus Sherrill's fumble was just a fumble. It was not caused by anything. It wasn't because of spectacular special teams play. So this is all more about what the Vikings did wrong, and I don't think there's anything particularly threatening in my head about the way Chicago does their special teams. I don't think their kicking game has been that strong. Not something I can feel like I can criticize as a Vikings fan. But in terms of field goals and extra points, there's a somewhat decent possibility for a miss. On kickoffs, they're not great, they're not bad. On kickoff returns, they haven't been doing all that well. I don't think they've been starting. I don't think they're in the top half in terms of average starting field position off of kickoff. So, it's an opportunity for the Vikings to choose not to get a touchback and instead, pin them, inside the 25. So that's something that's, worth taking a look at. In terms of punt return, it's no longer Devin Hester. There's no, they don't have special teams coordinator Dave Tube there anymore. So their special teams unit is just not that threatening to me, nor do I think the Vikings' recent problems in special teams will show up in the same way, it's just correcting your own problems. I wouldn't be surprised if Cordell Patterson, did a fine job against them in terms of generating hidden yards.
Well, let's hit the mailbag real quick, and we got a great question to start off from Stephen Adams, who asks, "What Chicago feature, food, geography, etc., best describes our offensive line?"
Which Chicago food describes our offensive line?
Food, geography, etc. Well, what about Chicago best describes our offensive line? I feel like it's the scene in Blues Brothers where all those cop cars are piling up on each other over by underneath the famous underneath the famous train, under these famous train tracks, that scene where they're all just piled up on top of each other, one after another after another. I feel like that best describes our offensive line.
So I'd only heard the food part, and so I was like, well, I actually really like Chicago food a lot, but then it came to me. Deep dish pizza. Because, like the offensive line, it is only pizza in name only.
Really? Are we gonna...
It's not pizza! It's a fine casserole.
It is a fine casserole. Actually, the thing I miss most about living in the cities is Devani's deep dish pizza. Devani's has a great deep dish.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, their veggie deep dish is so good and so fatty that even at my fattest, I could have 2 pieces and be like, I'm good for the rest of the day. I'm sprinkle a little bit of chicken on this and call it good, and make believe that this is somewhat healthy because of all of the vegetables they decide to toss onto it.
Well, there are vegetables in it, so it's clearly healthy.
Yes, exactly. Has nothing to do with the ridiculous amount of fat that just congeals in it.
Right, so I think that the Vikings offensive line is composed of a number of players who are very good at being a 6th offensive lineman.
I feel like if there's one quote you should take away from this show, it's that. That is probably the thing that sums up this entire year as far as the offensive line goes. Yep, our team is filled with a bunch of guys who would be 6th best on anybody else's roster.
In the same way, I think that Chicago deep dish style pizza. Very good. Tastes very good. Just isn't pizza. That's all.
You guys just aren't an offensive line. We're sorry.
Yeah.
Next question is from Matt in Wisconsin, who asks, can we trade Adrian Peterson for a new offensive line?
To who?
That's the question. Like, who would take that contract? Who would take that, like, the burden of the 32-year-old quarterback or 32-year-old running back?
Well, by the time he's healthy for them, I think he'd be 32, yeah.
Yeah. Plus, you then have to help finance the camel parties and everything, so do you...
That's right. It's all those hidden expenses.
Yeah, there's hidden expenses in the Adrian Peterson trade that nobody talks about. Yeah,
camel parties, the child care, cost racks up.
Really?
What? He takes his kids to a lot of games. Two very adorable kids that he publicly takes to games.
I was going to say he has a lot of kids, so that would be a lot of.
Oh, does he? I was in no way referencing that.
Sure. He also has a question about Schefter's possibly Teddy Never Plays Again article that keeps on getting clicks. Could you apply your keen insight to expose some of the other things that are possible?
Yeah, well, I mean, if I talk to like a doctor, I'm sure I could ask, like, hey, is Sam Bradford going to die this year? And he'd be like, oh, that's certainly possible. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Right? And he'd be like, oh, yeah, okay.
Well, but he's seen the offensive line that protects him, yes.
Right, yeah. Someone takes that many hits, there's a good chance they could die. But, you know, I wouldn't write an article about it. I wouldn't be like, doctor says Sam Bradford could die this year.
I feel like if you were in the hot take business, you could do that.
I feel like even a hot take artist would, like, at least pause before hitting publish.
like Skip Bayless would sit there for a second at Twitter and just go, do I really want to tweet this? Wait, it's not about LeBron or about the Cowboys. Why am I bothering tweeting anything?
Well, it is about... No, never mind. Because Sam Bradford's Oklahoma, right?
Yes.
Not Oklahoma State.
No.
Damn.
So
can't
close.
even, like, work in the other Cowboys in there. That's too bad. Wait, but Skip is from Oklahoma, right?
God, the less I know about Skip Bayless, the better I feel, and the less exposure I have to Skip Bayless. I'm fairly certain that Skip Bayless contains the same amount of like cancer-causing agents that like a little thing of skull has.
So you were 100% correct about this, and I detest watching Skip Bayless, but like his story is like fascinating to me. So his brother is one of the greatest like Mexican cuisine chefs in North America, which by the way includes Mexico, right? Like he's an incredibly good chef, and they don't talk to each other; they hate each other.
If you had to deal with Skip Bayless at Thanksgiving, would you want to talk to him either?
Well, no, obviously. He's just amazing, right? Like, his own family was, like, too much.
I feel like, at this point, we would be comparing, like, Frank Stallone and Sly Stallone. Like, you have a famous brother. That doesn't make you a decent person.
Well, they're both famous, and, like, people don't tend to connect the two of them that I think his name is Rick Bayless. I think he has Michelin stars. Like, he's a really good chef. But, yeah, they're both famous, and like people don't tend to connect the two. And one of them is awful. One of them is actually like, from what I hear, is like a really good person.
Well, you've learned that about Skip Bayless's brother.
But I think they don't talk to each other not because Skip Bayless is awful as like a person at his job. I think they don't talk to each other because they like disagree about their dad.
Well, that's too bad. Getting back to the Teddy Never Plays Again question. I mean. In the whole like possible thing, it's possible that he comes back next year or comes back in 2 years or sort of some sort of thing. But isn't the Teddy Never Plays Again just a little bit too reactionary? Yeah,
I mean, I bet Adam Schefter, the doctor that Adam Schefter talked to, who I mean, there's a good chance it's just Chow, the former San Diego Chargers doctor who's like disgraced.
I was going to say that when you hear the word San Diego doctor, the first question you should have is, did he work with the Chargers, and is he currently under investigation for something?
Right. So the answers are yes and maybe. I think he got like his license pulled or whatever. Anyway, it's a good chance it was him because it was like a doctor who's worked with NFL teams in the past, right? So it's a decent chance it's him because if it's somebody that actually worked on Teddy, Schefter would have worded it differently, like source with knowledge of the situation, right? Source with medical knowledge of the situation, right? Instead it was just like, yeah, I talked to a doctor who like knows stuff and he's worked with NFL teams before, so I like a decent chance it's just Stephen Chow, but I'm sure that he was also like, oh, there's the possibility that he returns and is like, back to what he was. Those are all like possibilities. There's no. The thing that bothers me most about the story is that it provides no new information because it doesn't tell you like what the odds are, right? They're not like, from what I know, the odds are like low that he could ever return to play. Like if he'd even just said the odds are low, then that would have been new information. But instead, he was just like, yeah, out of the many possibilities, like, man, there's a possibility that Jerick McKinnon's ankle injury is so bad that he never returns to football, right? But it's not likely.
I mean, what just happened with Arian Foster?
Yeah. I mean, I think there was a possibility that he could return and he just retired because he's like sick of rehab, kind of like with what happened with Lodeholt.
A bit, yeah.
Yeah, which I mean, same thing functionally. So maybe the doctor prediction would be correct in that instance, right? So, but we don't know if the possibility is greater that he'll return to full form, greater that he'll return but not at full form, or greater that like he'll never play again, or like I don't know, he could just die, right? Like we don't know what the chances are of any of those four possibilities, but it's a possibility.
I suppose that's all we can really ask for. Skull Page asks, what role will the tight ends play in the Bears game?
So I talked about this a little bit. So Zach Miller is someone who worries me a little bit. I mean, the Vikings, like, statistically have matched up well against tight ends, but I'm just, like, worried schematically, like, with Barr playing worse in coverage than he usually is, with Greenway as bad as he is, with Jaron Kearse, instead of Andrew Sandejo in there, you've got, like, some weaknesses. Obviously, Harrison Smith, man-to-man. Eric Kendricks has played well last couple of games in coverage, but he also played really, really poorly in coverage in the first couple of games. I think there's some worries there with Zach Miller. He is their leading touchdown receptionist, so who knows. As for Kyle Rudolph, I think that he matches up fine. Like I don't think there's a problem, but I just think that schematically the receivers are better positioned to win. The linebackers, both Danny Trevathan and Jarrell Freeman, have been excellent in coverage. Adrian Amos has been doing a pretty good job in coverage as well. They've got a strong safety who's not great at coverage, and maybe that's the matchup you end up getting, in which case you should attack it. But I feel like it's entirely possible that Kyle Rudolph has a good game because the matchups are fine for him in some senses. But it just seems like it's not as advantageous for him as it is to attack the receiver. So. If I was deciding between two relatively equal tight ends, I would pick the other one, right? If it was Kyle Rudolph and someone else, I would just be like, yeah, I'll pick the other one.
Yeah.
That decision's already been made for you because it's a Monday night game. So
pretty much. So Alex Goebel asks, if Bradford has an interception in the first quarter in Vikings territory, do we lose? Is that the canary in the coal mine?
Yeah, so if the Vikings are forced to play from behind and you just kind of assume that they won't get another special teams or defensive touchdown to even the score, no, I think that the Eagles were just a different class of team. I think that the Eagles are between good and very good. Maybe they are very good. Maybe I should just give them credit for that. And so, when you fell behind them, they could consistently put pressure by putting up more points on offense, by creating, restricting opportunities on defense, and, taking advantage of the fact that now that you're behind, it's predictable what you're going to do. I don't think that's the case with Chicago. I think that you can run the ball on them, even though, the Vikings don't have a home run threat with Asiata. I think that you can pass the ball on them, even though they've got, a pretty good safety and they've got some decent coverage linebackers and stuff like that. I don't think that the score will dictate, how well the Vikings do. If you can't tell, I'm very confident about this game. But, I don't think that, even if it's a pick six, right? I don't think that sets the Vikings back so much that they're out of it. Like it kind of did in the Eagles game. Somebody
was comparing the first quarter of the Eagles game to the Hagler-Hearns boxing match from the from 70s or 80s. Have you seen Hagler-Hearns?
No, man, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Hagler versus Hearns is one of the most famous boxing matches in the history of the sport. And normally in boxing, the first couple rounds are all just kind of feeling out, couple of light jabs here, just trying to figure out, okay, you're going to be stepping in here, you're going to be switching left to right, that sort of thing. Hagler-Hearns is one of the most famous fights ever because they just open up and start wailing on each other. And just like huge haymaker to huge haymaker, both of them just going nuts. And Al Michaels is the one who calls this.
Oh, and no way!
It's totally worth a look up on YouTube for it. But they were describing it, and after that first round, it was just like neither fighter was really the same, and the Vikings were basically in that sort of situation. After all of those turnovers in a row, that the Vikings were just like, I'm just kind of seeing stars at this point. I clearly have a concussion, but I'm not backing down from this jackass. Like, I have to keep going.
I mean, that does sound apt.
Yes. So if you've never seen it, it's totally worth the YouTube trip. But yeah, it was a lot like that fight. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that we probably won't be in that sort of like big punch battle as far as two big defenses going at each other. But so the next question is from @Adam West, who asks, will we see an O-line rotation again? Who makes the awful call that to do that? Is it Zim, Norv Turner, Sperano?
I think that it's North Turner has the final decision, and Sperano is the one who kind of informs that decision. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if, like, for the most part, it's like a rubber stamping from Norv, and Sperano, like, makes the call, but Norv has to approve it or whatever, right? So the final accountability rests with him. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw more rotation. Like, I know it was like heavily criticized. I know, what was it, Mark Schlereth was a former offensive lineman. Better offensive lineman than commentator, but in this case, I kind of trust like his evaluation of the situation. He was very critical of it. I think Jeff Schwartz super critical of it. From what I know, everybody that I've seen who has played offensive line or who has like talked about it has been like deeply critical of it, and I get it. I wouldn't be surprised to see more of it because the problems that Jake Long had, to me, and maybe I'm totally wrong, but the problems that Jake Long had, to me, were not technical problems. They were not physical problems, which is like the first thing you'd be concerned about. The fact that he played poorly, is he like physically unable to play? And I don't even know how much of it was actually like rust. I think a lot of it was just knowing the protection scheme and what to do in particular situations. And I think that in the long run, he's a better left tackle option. Like when you're making that playoff run, I think I want Jake Long in there at left tackle, in the divisional round in the playoffs of the conference championship game. I want Jake Long in there instead of TJ Clemmings. And I think you want to get him up to speed as soon as possible. And yeah, I don't know if it led to the loss, right? But it basically led to a loss, having him in for those 10 snaps. So it's a pretty high cost of development. But I think that if you put him in there, you really do a better job of getting him prepared for the playoffs. And I think that we're going to see more of it just because, to me, his problems were in awareness of what he needed to do. And so, the faster you get that together, the better the offensive line is going to be going forward. And again, I've indicated that I'm actually optimistic about this offensive line. I have an offensive line piece written at 1500 ESPN, and my point is that the interior of the offensive line, Boone, Fusco, Berger, they've all played well the past 3 games, I think, and in particular in pass protection. Jeremiah Searles has had one bad game at right tackle amid the several games that he's played at right tackle, and he's played some pretty good games at right tackle. So, I think in one of the games he was even the best offensive lineman, right? So I think that going forward, Jeremiah Searles is probably going to play all right at right tackle. So left tackle position is the only one that I'm concerned about. TJ Clemmings may have played better than any of the other tackles in this game, but I don't think he played well. He just played better. He still gave up 5 hurries on 39 dropbacks. That's not a good rate at all. That's according to PFF. I logged 2 more failures on his part, one of which was hidden by the fact that it was a one-step drop, so the fact that he was beaten immediately didn't result in pressure. And Another one, I'm sure they just assigned the responsibility to Bradford or to someone else or something like that. But I think that, Clemens as an offensive lineman actually failed at a fairly alarming rate, but it's just hidden by the fact that Searles was worse, that Long was worse. And so going forward, I don't think there's any indication that TJ Clemmings is a person that you can rely on to play left tackle for you. So, in the playoffs, I think Jake Long can be. So I think we're going to see more rotation just because of that.
Just because of that. Next question is from Carson Schubert, who asks, is blocking for the run out of the shotgun different, or does it differ a lot from blocking for the run with a QB under center?
Yeah, it changes the timing. Like when you peel off of your double team to move up to the second level, you don't want to do it too early, otherwise you'll lose, the block, right? They're just going to win the half-man battle against the remaining offensive lineman and make the block. And you don't want to move too late, otherwise the running back's going to get to the hole before you can get to the second level. And when the running back does that, changes under center versus in shotgun. In shotgun, they very, very often will get to the line of scrimmage a lot faster, so you have to get up to the second level and secure that block a little bit better. In that situation. Also, it changes sort of what plays you can call. It's very difficult to run power in shotgun because of the timing problem. So you're just much more likely going to run zone plays. Not to say that it's impossible that it doesn't happen. I mean, I've seen read option, man blocking plays out of shotgun. Like, it happens, and it can actually be extremely effective because the point of a power play is to get more people at the point of attack than there are defenders. And then when you add the read option in it, you're effectively blocking even more people. So it can be really effective, but I think that just more often you're going to see the kind of blocking that encourages sort of quicker play and stuff like that. So there are a couple of differences. I've also noticed, I noticed this last year, and I ended up asking Sam Monson from Pro Football Focus about this because I was like, this is really strange. But Joe Berger was abysmal at blocking in shotgun last year. He was really, really good at blocking, in runs that originated from under center. But he was just so bad at blocking out of shotgun. It was so stark that I was like, maybe this is actually more closely related to the Adrian Peterson problem than Adrian Peterson being able to run out of shotgun, which I ultimately concluded that, there were multiple things at play, and one of them was Adrian Peterson wasn't very good at running out of shotgun. But it was so significant to me that I thought that this might be strong enough. I know Pro Football Focus loves Berger, especially his run blocking. So I asked them about it, and they were like, "Oh, well, we hadn't thought to look, but yeah, no, he was actually really, really bad. Small sample, of course, right? But as a center, I mean, it's obviously much more difficult to snap in shotgun than it is, under center, because I mean, you've got immediate feedback. That's a really important part of like human cognition and stuff like that. But also, it doesn't take as much technique. Obviously, it always takes technique to get out of your stance after you're in an awkward position snapping. But you're in an even more awkward position when you're shotgun snapping because you have to generate leverage in order to get that ball moving and be accurate at the same time. And it's harder to get out of your stance and block. And so that can be really significant too. So blocking out of shotgun is a lot different. I know that there are people who have played offensive linemen who listen to this podcast and stuff like that. So if I'm completely wrong, feel free to like email me or tell me in the comments of the Daily Norseman section. But from the people I've talked to and stuff like that, yeah, it can be pretty significantly different.
Next question we have is from Judd Zelgat's Hoodie, who asks, have you ever harmed a stuffed animal?
Not as an adult.
Not as an adult, no.
Yeah.
You've never set up...
But I have never had to motivate a team of football players before, so who knows what I could get up to.
Yeah, and it's not totally out of the realm of possibilities if you find yourself a GM one day and have to find a way to motivate the Cleveland Browns. I assume the Browns would end up hiring you as just like a numbers thing, but...
Right, the analytic Browns.
Yeah, exactly.
I will say that now that I think about it, when I was coaching high school debate, I did threaten someone's stuffed animal. When they're a high school student with a stuffed animal, it's pretty easy to threaten them. I was not a kid-friendly coach. Let me put that out there.
There is a reason why Arif is no longer teaching, is no longer assisting with the youth of this country. No. Right. Final question is from the Tweetist, who asks, why is Carson Wentz so bad?
It's because he's bad. I'm glad you asked this question, Tweetist, because Carson Wentz is bad, and I'd like to point out that he's bad.
Yes. I also like to point out that Carson Wentz is bad simply because I spent most of my weekend in Fargo, which is Carson Wentz Central. You cannot go 6 inches without seeing something about Carson Wentz or the Eagles down there. It is nuts. Just, it's... The truck stop I tend to stop at when I'm leaving town has a large selection of Wentzylvania shirts that have a picture of North Dakota on it, but it's like an eagle, but in like NDSU colors and stuff. It's just,
oh, God,
it's everywhere.
God,
it is. Like, I'm still getting used to the fact that Fargo is just so big into football now, thanks to NDSU winning a bunch of championships in a row. But the fact that they're just so all in on Carson Wentz, which I understand, it's a North Dakota boy, whatever. But like, it's. I almost can't handle it. Like, it's just everywhere. Everywhere you turn, there is a Shields. There's a Shields ad with his face on it, or there's T-shirts. People are wearing it up and down Broadway or something. It's just, Well,
someone tweeted at me they live in Bismarck, and I'm willing to bet that it's worse.
No, so but here's the thing with North Dakota and like professional players of any sport is that multiple towns or multiple cities in North Dakota will try to claim them. What's the name of? There was a famous pitcher, Darren Erstad, is from.
Oh yeah. We talked about this a little bit too. Everybody claimed it.
Yeah, there's like
everybody east of Bismarck, including Bismarck, claimed him.
Yeah, there's like 4 cities that have like a billboard in front of this before the city, like theme, former home of all-star pitcher Darren Erstad, and then the years that he may have like driven through the town. But what's interesting is that like, even though it wouldn't be as legitimate because he's from Montana, but like, I wouldn't be surprised if I had seen more North Dakota cities claim Phil Jackson because he just went to UND and he attended Williston High School. But yep, he attended Williston High School. But if you go to the new Alumni Center in Grand Forks, at the University of North Dakota, there's a big thing in one of the parts of the building about famous alumni, including a giant write-up on Phil Jackson, who may have spent like it was either 1 year or 2 years, but it wasn't for any real length of time. But he has a big write-up in the for UND. And it's like, yep, he played here for just a little bit. It's not like Ed Belfour or something who played for multiple years and then moved on, or Zach Parise or something like that.
So I remember reading Phil Jackson's wiki page a while back. Because I attended the University of North Dakota, I might as well like learn about him. And he, if I remember, he didn't watch any movies in high school, and he never attended a dance until college. Because it was actually like a Footloose situation where like dancing and television wasn't allowed where he grew up. Before he moved to Williston.
I was going to say before he moved to Williston or inside of Williston, because I would believe either. I've had the pleasure of visiting. I could see a Footloose situation happening in the 70s, 80s out there, 90s, yeah.
Well, I mean, where he grew up, so it'd be like the 40s, 50s.
Well, still, I don't care.
Even more likely, honestly.
Let's just be honest here. They wouldn't show the movie Footloose in this town. I'm willing to bet.
No, they would, but it would be a tragedy, right? Because like dancing triumphs, and they'd be like, "This is the danger." And so like the principal Third Rock, whatever his name is, wouldn't be seen as a villain. He'd be seen as the hero.
Is that it? Would they really want to be throwing money at? Is this what we're really talking about at the end of this episode of Norse Code?
It's the mailbag. We talk about whatever, man. Dusty had like a half-hour screed on like the way that you push coffee out of a filter. Like it just happens.
I just haven't been on the show for a couple of weeks, so I forget how the mailbag works. That occasionally we break into discussion on Footloose.
Yeah, how footloosey is Williston?
How footloosey is?
Okay, we 100% have at least one listener from Williston. They'll tell us.
Please, which we will help wrap up the show. If you know how footloosey Williston is, you can contact us in a couple of different ways. You can email us at norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. You can also tweet the show at norsecode. at Norse Code DN, or you can tweet to Arif directly at Arif Hassan NFL. You can tweet myself at Big Mono, although I do the Norse Code DN account as well. And if you would like to tell Dusty that he needs to come back on the show, you can do so at Dusty O'Connell. I feel like that was a good segue. That actually worked for
that worked out really well
for that particular moment. If you have heard value in the show, or if you see value in the show, please donate to us. You can do so one of two different ways. You can do so or you can do so by going to patreon.com/NorseCode, or you can go to paypal.me/NorseCode and make a one-time donation there. That sounds like the end of the show here. Now that we've thoroughly discussed the Footloose issue and whether or not Williston is a part of that, Arif, do you have anything to plug before we wrap up for the show?
One thing to add, we talked about a bunch of North Dakota athletes and alums, and we did not mention Jim Kleinsasser, so I just want to say I'm aware of it. He just did not come up organically in the discussion.
No.
But he was not worshipped in Grand Forks, unfortunately. He should have been.
He was not worshipped in Grand Forks necessarily, but he definitely gets the love out in Carrington. So.
Right. No, that's true. Things I'd like to plug. Hopefully I'll have a piece up on Per McPhee at 1500 ESPN by the morning, so I'll be able to link to that in the show notes. And even more ambitiously, I may have another piece up at Cold Omaha about Patterson, but I think that's probably unlikely. But just putting that out there, that's a possibility. Other than that, I did a great piece on, I think it's great, on it's the best piece, on reasons why we should be optimistic about the offensive line in my offensive line review last week over at 1500 ESPN. That'll be linked in the show notes as well.
That sounds like the best piece.
Yeah, I know all the words. I know the best words. I put them in the piece.
They're all. It's actually written in the style that Donald Trump speaks. It really is an amazing piece. All right, so that should be the end of the show. So thank you guys once again for listening. We will be recapping and previewing the next game here in the next couple of days. So we'll let this one digest for a little bit. So for Arif, for Dusty, my name is James. Thank you so much for listening. And our formula is this: spoons out, and we'll see you later this week.
Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.